turning the page. Edit this, Mark, so you don't hear the paper turning.
You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Fast ship. Never heard of the William Falk?
Should I have?
It's the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
What a piece of junk.
Covering Star Wars vehicles in less than 12 parsecs, this is Start Your Engines.
Don't get technical with me.
Here are your hosts, Paul Naylor and Mark Newbold.
You're listening to Start Your Engines and another fantastic episode. I'm Mark Newbold, and joining me today is my trusty senior crew member, Paul Naylor. How you doing, Paul?
That's the politest intro that you've done on one of these ever.
I know. I'm looking forward to this. Basically talking about the Tantive IV, which is a CR90 corvette. There's lots and lots of history to this ship, loads and loads of details, as there always is, both canon and legends. But before we kick off with that, if you think about it, and not even having to think about it very hard, that is literally the very first starship you see on screen in all of Star Wars. Yeah. So, given that, what are your first impressions of that starship?
Look, the hairs on my arms have gone up. It's that very first thing that we saw at the cinema. 7, 8 years old, sat there, thrown back into your seat by the fantastic music by John Williams, and this ship, which for us looked huge anyway. And then obviously you see the Star Destroyer, and then that gave the Tantive IV some real perspective. The other thing that springs automatically to my mind is I didn't have it as a kid, but my mate Richard did have the die-cast Star Destroyer with the little plug-in Tantive IV. I would imagine loads of people have probably lost that over the years. It was just a great ship. I think I'm right in saying as well, when the Millennium Falcon was first drawn up, it was abandoned because it looked too much like the Eagles out of Space 1999. But then what they did is they obviously created something radically different for the Falcon. But then, bearing in mind what they'd already done, they thought, well, we can swap this around a bit and made the Tantive IV.
I think Colin Cantwell had designed the original Falcon, and like you say, very much like the Eagle Lander, and then changed the design, come up with the hamburger design. I think Lucas liked the cockpit of the Falcon, which was just straight at the very, very front of the ship. So said, take that cockpit and put it somewhere on the Falcon. So did a few different sort of versions of what that would look like. And then obviously, as they classically did, stuck it on the right-hand side of the ship. And it's amazing when you think that to come from those beginnings, to take that Falcon design and then add that sort of almost hammerhead look at the front and those beautiful big engines at the back, and you come up with a ship that was so damn cool, it's the first thing you see.
The other thing that I liked about it, as well as the interior shots of it, because obviously that's the first spaceship that we see the insides of as well.
That's true, yeah.
You know, it's taken all these years later before they've actually released the corridors of the Tantive IV as something for your action figures, but I always liked the crisp lines of it and everything. My son was the right age for when the Star Wars Lego games came out. So the scenes where you're running around on the Tantive IV with all the walls looking just like they would have done in the film, albeit Lego styling, I just love it. It's quietly iconic. That's what I would call it.
Oh, that's a great way of putting it. I love that. It is, because when you think of Star Wars, one of the things that a lot of people said, and George said it and the designers said it, used universe. Things are scuffed, things are dirty. So to initially, straight off the bat, give you a ship that is pristine white, clean as a whistle, and then kind of blow it up a little bit as the Empire comes through the door. But to do that and then send R2 and 3PO, who even at that point are a little bit scuffed and not exactly pristine clean, but they're not far off, down to Tatooine and the grimy, grubby, wind-battered, sand-battered machinery of Tatooine is such a cool juxtaposition. You don't really think of it because you're so used to watching it, but you're right, the Tantive IV is quietly iconic. I love that.
It just came to me, but I'm quite proud of that one.
You should be in marketing, Paul. You really should.
I should do this for a living. What were your first thoughts when you saw it? Did you remember it well?
Well, here goes a story. So when I was a kid, my dad was self-employed. He'd just started work for himself. went to Cannock ABC Cinema to see Star Wars first time with my dad, and we walked in during the Han and Greedo scene. So the first thing I remember from Star Wars is Han versus Greedo, which is why that scene is so kind of iconic to me. And then we watched it. And I only learnt this relatively recently, that back in the day, cinemas didn't mind if you bought a ticket to see the 2:00 show. And then if you wanted to watch it again, you just stop and watch it again. It was Star Wars with people wanting to repeat view, changed the way cinemas worked so that at the end of that screening, they'd kick you out. So luckily, our screening of Star Wars that I went with my dad when I was 6, I think it was before my birthday in 78, was not the last screening. So we watched all of Star Wars. It finished. They came in and tidied up the cinema and then came back in. And then we watched it up to the Han and Greedo scene. And I know that they would have let us just stop in and watch the whole thing. But my dad was like, "I've got to be up early for work tomorrow. Come on." And literally, when we got to Han and Greedo scene, we left. So my first screening of Star Wars was so out of order to any kid of our age. We were just blown away because we'd grown up on your 70s and 50s and 60s sci-fi, especially in the UK when Doctor Who was the sci-fi. And then you see Star Wars, it's literally like you're getting a wormhole view into another universe. Levels above anything.
It just felt real, didn't it? Yeah, you put it very well there. It did feel like you're almost watching a documentary from another galaxy.
And that ship, okay, I saw it out of order. I knew where this story had gone by the time I first saw the Blockade Runner. But nevertheless, there's no escaping the power of that opening scene, even though it wasn't the first Star Wars thing I saw because life sent me that way. But yeah, just incredible. And again, quietly iconic. We've seen that vehicle over the years in different avenues and different arenas. It's got a definitive endpoint at Exegol.
This is Adam Christopher, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
It was a CR90 corvette. It was in the service of the House of Organa. Obviously key to what happens in the Galactic Civil War, especially at the start, because it was Leia's personal starship leading up to the Battle of Yavin. And of course, as we saw in Rogue One,
manufacturer.
It was manufactured, like so many Star Wars starships are, by Corellian Engineering Corporation. That will be of no shock to you, Paul, because I think we did a tally of the amount of ships built by Corellian Engineering Corporation.
I can remember early on it was referred to as a Corellian corvette.
Yeah, and we always call it the Blockade Runner, don't we? That's the name that we kind of gave it.
Model and class.
It was an Alderanian diplomatic cruiser. I think that was its specific designation. And to buy one brand new, and who wouldn't want to, because they're beautiful, 1,200,000 credits.
Technical specifications.
490 foot long, 160 foot wide, 108 foot deep. So it's sizable, but it's not a monster.
It's amazing to think that all those years later, we got Rogue One. And we got essentially what was... And it's been cut together several times, and you can find it in social media, and where you've got the end of Rogue One bleeding into the beginning of A New Hope. And it just goes to show how much that scene stands the test of time initially anyway, but also how brilliantly Rogue One came about from just that initial bit of crawl in A New Hope, but then how they decided to end that film in such an amazing way and really honour that ship. That ship suddenly became so much more important with Rogue One.
Oh, very much so. It's a key moment because a phrase we hear a lot in Star Wars, in and around Star Wars, was hope. Leia's last line in Rogue One, it's the last word in Rogue One is hope. So to see that ship, especially in the Galactic Civil War era, literally signified hope. And weirdly, we don't see the ship again in the original trilogy because it gets captured by the Devastator and we don't know what's happened to it. You'd expect to see it in Return of the Jedi, but you don't. So that ship was captured and we don't see it again for a long time.
Does it appear in the sequels?
It does. You see it over Exegol. So that's the ship that Nien Nunb is in when the Emperor absolutely blasts the crap out of it and destroys the ship. The ship goes down and all aboard. I know Mike Quinn's not happy about that, but that's what happened, sadly.
Oh, dear. I didn't quite realise that. I've asked a question. I've upset myself.
I know. Very so. Take a moment whilst I continue.
Maximum atmospheric speed.
950 kilometres an hour.
Engine specs.
Gyrodyne TER58 ion turbine engines.
Hyperdrive rating.
It's got a Class 2 hyperdrive, which is pretty handy for getting yourself out of a pickle. It's equipped with shielding.
Sensor systems.
And it has long-range sensor systems. Incredibly useful, almost like a military sensor suite. You can pick things up from a great distance. So while she's not the fastest ship, the most heavily armed ship, although she is armed, it can handle itself. It kept a Star Destroyer at bay for a fair chunk of time, but it's not going to take down massive. It's not a battleship. It's not a warship or anything.
Navigation system.
It's got a navigomputer, obviously.
Armament.
In terms of armament, and we do see it pinging shots back at the Star Destroyer, it's got 2 double Taman back H9 turbo lasers, hefty turbo lasers. It has 4 single Taman back H9 turbo lasers, so it can pack a punch, it can look after itself to a certain degree.
Escape craft.
It's got 4 12-passenger escape pods and 8 small escape pods. R2 and 3PO bundle themselves into one of the smaller sort of two-man... You're not getting anybody else in there apart from them as they tumble down to Tatooine. That, in of itself, the escape pod sequence, it's one of the first things that they shot, ILM shot, one of the first effects that they managed to get away. I think it was that and one of the big guns on the Death Star when George came back and said, what the hell's happened to my $2 million? The importance of that moment can't be understated, but seeing R2 and 3PO tumble away, and the guy's got them in his sights, the Imperial officer, there's no life forms aboard. Don't waste a blaster bolt on it.
We're paying by the laser now?
But yeah, exactly. You think how different the galaxy would be if that guy had gone, screw it, just took a shot.
The end. Interestingly, it never actually made it to production, but there were some stills of a Kenner model that was going to be released towards the end of the line. I think where they were struggling with it was to give it the sort of playability. It would probably been twice as long as the Millennium Falcon, so I think they didn't really want it to outshine that. And also they probably thought, well, will it sell anywhere near as close as a Millennium Falcon? Because it's quietly iconic, but it's not as iconic as a Millennium Falcon.
I suppose if you think about it, you know what they did with the Star Destroyer playset? Because that wasn't... I know you could lift the Star Destroyer up with handle at the front. You could if you wanted to fly it around. It didn't really look like a Star Destroyer. The engines at the back were kind of cool, but they weren't Star Destroyer. But there was enough about it that you could believe it because of Vader's meditation chamber, the hologram of the Emperor, the little trapdoor, or there's enough on it.
It was nice. I mean, I always considered it to be like the nose piece, if you like.
Yes.
But it was a mishmash of all elements, really. And I'm sure you've picked up on this, and it was only in very recent years that I found out that the Millennium Falcon could actually hook onto the back of that ship. It was like a secret feature.
Wow, I will definitely do that.
You know, the legs of the Kenner Falcon?
Yeah.
They lined up perfectly towards the rear part of the ship, and you can recreate the scene of the Falcon being hooked onto the Star Destroyer.
Well, you've just blown my tiny mind.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Crew complement.
Now, depending on configuration, because there are various configurations, the crew is between 30 and 165, or 46 crew, 39 diplomats. It's a diplomatic ship. We kind of know it as that. So when you see it in Revenge of the Sith, for example, when it's a lot cleaner and they're heading away from Coruscant and they're all about to go their separate ways, you kind of get the sense that this vehicle has meeting rooms where you see Bale and Yoda, Ben having their conversation. So there's definitely that. But it can carry up to 600 passengers, incredibly, which kind of puts it in the sort of the Halcyon range.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of vibe of ship. I know the Halcyon's much older.
Consumables.
It's got a year's worth of consumables. So if it gets lost in space, you can cope, you can manage for a year. Obviously, with lesser crew, you would last longer.
Beans and soup, that sort of thing.
Grim, but edible.
Sponge pudding?
Oh, yeah, don't. You're making me hungry, man.
Vehicle usages.
Troop carrier, cargo liner, consular ship or escort vessel. Yeah. Those all feel very much in keeping. You do see blockade runners in Jedi. None of them are the Tantive IV, but you do see them in the Rebel fleet. So they are still kicking around and kicking ass as they're doing it.
Commissioning date.
It was commissioned 22 years before Star Wars. That would have put it up in the air before Revenge of the Sith at around about the time of Attack of the Clones. And it was destroyed 35 years after the Battle of Yavin over Exegol. It has a 57-year lifetime. When you think of that then, when you think of sequences from that ship, and there's a few now when you think about it, there's that scene in Rogue One at the end, getting the plans to the Rebel troopers that ultimately get handed to Leia. Absolutely iconic. Any of the opening scenes with Leia giving R2 the message, even Revenge of the Sith with the guys before they all go their separate ways to protect Luke and Leia. There's really some key moments on that ship. Of those moments, do any sort of stand out strong to you?
Couple, yeah. So I think probably in Rogue One, the interior shot where the doors open and you can see the back of Leia. I think probably because when I first saw that cinema, it was sort of like, right, how are they going to handle this? Are we just going to see it from the back? What they're going to do? And we've been lucky enough to meet Ingvild, who portrayed Leia in that scene. She's did a really cool job of that. But then the other one for me that I really, really like, partially because the signed photo that I've got of Anthony Daniels as 3PO is of him in the corridor at the end of Revenge of the Sith. I do like that. I like the fact that we get Captain Antilles in that scene. Things that we've just heard talk of over the years, and it just gives it that extra sort of, yeah, you know what you're doing here.
And funny you mentioned that scene with 3PO, because recently Tony Gilroy mentioned, in relation to Andor, he wouldn't bite the cherry on whether or not Grand Moff Tarkin is in Andor. My gut tells me he is. I don't know. Thematically, story-wise, feels like he needs to be there.
I would be surprised if he's not in, even if it's just sort of like a hologram or something.
But he said that the technology they used for Guy Henry to do Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One is basically obsolete technology, and that now they use completely new methods to do what they do. Recently, there was a very short Star Trek mini-movie, if you like, called Unification, and it's Sam Witwer playing Kirk. And they refer to the means of which they've made Witwer look like Kirk as digital makeup. Yeah. And so I'm very curious now, given that this is just stunningly well done, that if they did that with Tarkin, that might be the way they do it. But going back to Rogue One and that end sequence with Leia in the cockpit, and when she turns around now, we see it now, and you see Leia. It's, you know, Ingvild did a great job. But from a visual effects point of view, now you're like, and now you just wonder how well they would do it, because now we've got Andor coming. So I think Leia in that setting on that ship with the hood up, which is kind of how you see her for certain sequences in A New Hope as well, with the cloak hood up, is very, well, one, it's sort of reminiscent of Ben. It's a Jedi vibe with the hood up, which kind of sends all sorts of little sort of signals down the timeline as well. So I think that's beautifully done. But go back to my point of the 3PO shot. When they filmed that, obviously it was all on green screen. So original footage, all you can see in Anthony's beautifully buffed up, shiny exterior is green. And some poor ILM artist, she had to sit there and basically paint all that green out. You know, you think now they'd go, that shot, that's a nightmare. Let's just do that on the volume. Just do it on the volume. It's easy. Just do it on the volume.
That has really changed things, hasn't it, the volume? Yeah.
And I just wonder how if they did that now, if they needed to do a ship like that now, would they build? I mean, they'd have to build part of it. You've got to physically walk on things. But I wonder if that would be the route they would take to do certain sequences.
I think they would. I think they would. They'd use the volume, and then what they do, which is very clever. I mean, it's an easy thing to do, but it tricks the mind. Is just have foreground objects that are physical, give you that extra depth.
Yeah.
But with what you were saying there, and because Rogue One is such a well-loved film, I don't know anybody that doesn't like Rogue One. Would it be worth them going back and, similar to what they did with the Phantom Menace when they replaced the Yoda puppet with a better version of Yoda, because it's such a short scene, particularly with Leia, it would make sense for them, if the technology is that quick and that easy now, to replace that.
That's a great point. I completely agree. And I think with ILM, everyone's standing on the shoulders of giants kind of logic. Yeah. And that work you just referred to, the original work, is out there on physical media. So it's out there. But I do think sometimes you only see Leia for a couple of seconds at the end of Rogue One. So if they were able to do something with that, make it even more realistic, which is always the aim, and it turns around all of a sudden, you're like, well, no, that's Carrie Fisher. Yeah. With all the respect that you could possibly hope to imbue with anything that's using an actor that's passed on, I think that would be wonderful. I really do.
Makes me automatically think of like when the Return of the Jedi special edition came out and they reinserted the Jabba scene.
Yeah.
At the time when we saw it, and we saw the Tazos, and we saw the cards that came out and the posters, we think, great, they've managed to get Jabba into that. That's really clever. But then when they upgraded it again for the DVD release, I think it was by the time it came out, they'd gone back and done him again. That's the one thing that's always been good about Star Wars, is that it pushes the envelope each time that it does something, but it's not afraid to replace it with newer technology. Things like in A New Hope, where you'd got the swarm of X-Wing fighters going into battle. You could see inside Luke's cockpit, and you could see him move inside it. Brilliant. Absolutely do that. They should do that. And George Lucas, well quoted for saying, films are never completed, they're abandoned. And that's true. That's how he views things, isn't it?
No, that's a great quote. Without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you can improve these things, and it doesn't negate the work that went before, because those amazing artists doing it now with the tools we've got now would have done phenomenal work. And I think, again, it goes back to Tony Gilroy's point about, if we did Tarkin now, we wouldn't do it the way we did it before. I think his analogy was, imagine a steam-powered car. We've just made the greatest steam-powered car ever. And then the next guy comes on and goes, yeah, well, I've got this thing called diesel. And away you go. So it's a great analogy.
Hi, this is Guy Henry, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Enjoy.
Major engagements.
The Tantive IV was present, as we've mentioned, for a number of key events and battles. It was part of the Rada Uprising. It was there for the Battle of Scarif, as we've mentioned before. The secret mission to Alderaan, obviously Leia trying to get in touch with Ben Kenobi, and the Battle of Exegol, where it met its untimely end. That sequence, the Emperor, he's basically stealing the powers of the Dyad. He's showing his strength. He's zapping with like insane levels of power. He's the conduit to this power of Exegol, if you like. And he's pretty much taken out the fleet. You see the Tantive IV go down. You see the cockpit, they're all being electrocuted. They're dying, and they do die. They all go. It strikes me that as much as it's a symbol of hope at the very beginning, it's almost like, because we are on the cusp of the Emperor finally being defeated, and Rey is about to get that victory, and Ben is about to give his life force to allow her to do it. Everyone's giving something up for this final moment because she's the conduit to making the good side win, if you like. I wonder if the filmmakers realised, I'm sure they did, that we see that ship. It's the first thing we ever saw. And usually in Star Wars, it's a tip of the hat. You know, in Revenge of the Sith, the picture you mentioned earlier that Matthew's got signed, that's Anthony. His final scene was in the ship where you first saw him, because that was supposed to be the final scene he ever shot. And then they make more stuff for the next 20 years. And he's still making stuff now. But symbolically, it would have been very easy for the Tantive IV to fly away at the end of the Falcon, but it didn't. It got destroyed.
Yeah.
That symbolism, you know, in a film that's been much maligned, but I think has some very, very cool moments in it.
Well, I think I'm right in saying it's the only ship that's appeared in all three trilogies.
I think you could just about match it with one ship, and that's the Falcon.
The Falcon's very, very...
It's like bottom of the screen, like flying onto Coruscant. And George said, that is the Falcon.
I'll rephrase, sir. It's the only ship in all three trilogies that's got some notable scenes.
I love it. I'll take that. You're absolutely right. It does. In the prequel trilogy, definitely getting them all back to Coruscant, that's a key scene. And also you see it at the very end, taking Leia to Alderaan, of course. You see the ship at the end there. The opening of A New Hope, that couldn't be more key. The Battle of Exegol, where it goes down, that's a pretty damn key scene. So that's a very good observation. If you look across the three trilogies, and Rogue One, don't forget, that ship has had big moments in three trilogies and one of the spin-offs. I'm very curious to see if they do anything else with that ship as we delve into the past, because it is around at the time of Andor Season 2, so there is a possibility that you could see the ship if they wanted to show it.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, we could see it being quietly iconic.
Affiliations.
The House of Organa, the Alderaanian Consular Security, Galactic Republic, Alliance to Restore the Republic, Resistance Navy, Galactic Republic Navy, because obviously they had ownership of the ship for a while after they captured it, the Rebel Alliance Navy, the Resistance Navy, the Royal Alderaan Civil Fleet. So it's been a part of a number of different sort of organisations. Its owners, Bail Organa, Leia Organa, Ramus Antilles, Captain Antilles, as you mentioned, is the commander that we know, and notable crew members, Jeremiah Colton, R2 and 3PO, of course, and Nien Nunb. So it's not had as many toys made of that ship as it should have done. I'm very curious to see if Jazzwares ever get around to doing one. I do believe there was a Fantasy Flight model of the Tantive IV for the X-Wing miniatures game. There's the Corridor playset that Hasbro did, which is kind of cool. You had the Escape Pod.
Yeah, Land of the Jawas.
Which was that a Sears exclusive?
Richard, who I quoted earlier on in the show, he had the Land of the Jawas playset. So whether that was an import, I can remember having that cardboard and plastic playset, but most of all being envious about the fact that he got the escape pod.
Think about it, though, in terms of toys, that's the thing we saw the most, 70s, 80s, of that ship, of that Blockade Runner, was the escape pod. You're the winner of this episode, Paul. Quietly iconic is beautiful. A major player in three trilogies in a way that no other ship is. You know, there are Star Destroyers in all trilogies, but they're different types of Star Destroyer. There's various iterations of vehicles that you see going through design stages. There's not one ship that's the same ship all the way through. So in that sense, I would completely agree with you. I'd say the Tantive IV is very unique in that sense.
Having had this conversation, and I hope it has the same impact on people that listen to this, I don't think I'll view it the same again. I'll watch it again now and I'll think, blimey, that was always there. It's no coincidence that if it lasted 57 years, amongst the foodstuffs that would have been on board would have been lots of Heinz Varieties tins stored away just in case it was away for a year and couldn't get anywhere. Thank you very much. my work is done.
We haven't decided what we're going to talk about next. I'll float them with you. I've got ideas for the next ship that we're going to talk about. It won't be very long. I'm not the ship, I mean the gap between the next episode. Thanks for listening to Start Your Engines. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com and be sure to comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro and our Start Your Engines opening music, Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers, and of course, the data miners at Wikipedia. Remember to tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation. It's every Friday night at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. You're quite enjoyable to spend time with.
That's because I am quietly iconic.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.
Can we have the outtakes at the end?
No, it was too longer than the episode.